what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Friday, August 17th, 2018. Yes, this is a live broadcast, and we had a little technical difficulty getting started on time, but we are here and we are live. And obviously, the lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. And next Wednesday, we're going to have Layla from Ontario. We're going to give her the third hour. A lot of people have written into me that they're very impressed with her knowledge of history of the Middle East, and so we're just going to let her go for an hour and share what she knows with us. Thursday, Don Wiskin of Extendivite is going to be our third hour guest, talking about this very excellent product for those of you who are health conscious. So let's get into the news here. Starting with Syria. As you know, they're getting ready for what they're calling the battle for Idlib, and this is probably going to be basically the end of the Syrian war, barring an escalation by the United States for some made-up fantasy reason of Assad is passing wind in elevators or something. But apparently the 5th Assault Corps will participate in this battle for Idlib. And militant groups operating in western Syria have declared the villages of Bains, Berna, Al-Otamania, Hawaii al-Is, Tel Bajir, Jadida, Zumar, and Jizriya part of a military zone and ordered civilians to leave the area within 48 hours. So that looks like that's where the front lines are going to be set up. And apparently these militant groups are getting ready to fend off the advance of the Syrian Arab army. But considering how well the Syrian Arab army's been doing, I don't think they're going to really have a lot of luck. These troops are experienced. They've been fighting this war for like 7 years. They're battle hardened. Meanwhile, there is a report coming out of Blacklisted News. The U.S. still wants regime change. They're unwilling to admit to themselves, let alone the rest of the world, they have failed to accomplish their objective in Syria. Short version, they lost this one. And the U.S. is still trying to find a reason to stay in Syria and go on supplying ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And this report is basically saying that the Pentagon is drastically overestimating the number of ISIS remaining within Syria in order to justify a continued U.S. occupation, because that's their new excuse. Oh, we have to stay in Syria to prevent the rise of ISIS, and ISIS is everywhere. ISIS is hiding underneath your bed. ISIS is hiding in your bedroom closet. ISIS is stealing socks out of your dryer. And there's just ISIS everywhere. Well, no, they've been caught in yet another lie. Meanwhile, up in Raqqa, they have found yet another mass grave containing the bodies of civilians killed in U.S. air raids. And it's a small grave, but still in all, every single civilian killed, that's a war crime. Now, down in Palmyra, residents fear returning home, not because of the presence of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but because of the U.S. forces. They're more afraid of atrocities by the U.S. forces than by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And very few people have returned already, only 200 families. And people are worried about returning to Palmyra because they're close to the U.S. base at Al-Tanf. So Syrians are going to feel secure only after ISIS is eliminated and the U.S. leaves Syria, which is, of course, what the Syrian government wants. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Over at the State Department, they have named a special representative for Iran. And basically, Brian Hook has the job. He's the special representative for Iran. He's a top policy advisor within the State Department. And before the U.S. withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, he'd been advising the administration to work on getting an addendum to the deal as opposed to simply withdrawing. And the addendum, of course, would have covered those long-range missiles that Israel doesn't think Iran ought to have in order to make it easier to invade them here. So obviously, despite having lost in Syria, despite the fact that they're stuck both in Iraq and in Afghanistan, the plan to invade Iran apparently is still on the table, or to try and regime change it. And by the way, that isn't working out all that well. Apparently the people in Iran remember what happened back in 2009 when the U.S. ginned up a color revolution to try and topple Ahmadinejad. And it began to fall apart. They made two tactical mistakes. When they displayed the new flag of the Iranian Republic, it turned out to be the flag of the Shah of Iran. And the people of Iran have got a very bad memory of him. And the second was when the son of the Shah came on out and announced that he was ready to resume the peacock throne, which doesn't make it sound like they were planning a republic anyway. And apparently the son of the Shah is still out there, and he is basically making a lot of noise about getting rid of the Islamic government, forgetting that the Iranian people chose that government for themselves. But gosh darn it, we have to force those Iranians to live the way we do, because we're exceptional. Down in Yemen, they've had a mass funeral for all the kids who were killed on that attack on the bus. 51 coffins. And it was a massive funeral procession. A lot of people showed up. Now the Houthis are out there saying that this new child killing in Yemen is a disgrace to Saudi Arabia and the United States. And yes, it is. It is. It's a disgrace to Saudi Arabia for having carried out the strike on a public marketplace of no military value whatsoever. And of course the United States, who's the main arms supplier to Saudi Arabia, and who is really ultimately behind Saudi Arabia's going into Yemen. Because the U.S. had an intervention some years ago, and they put in a puppet ruler, and the people of Yemen didn't like puppet rulers, so they kicked him out. And that's what this war is really all about, slapping down the people of Yemen so that they'll accept foreign puppet rule as part of the American empire. And I got to tell you, I have a lot of respect for the people of Yemen for all that they've had to endure at the hands of the Saudis. Cholera, possibly weaponized. All the bombings, the blockades. And they refuse to bow. They refuse to bend. There's a lot of courage on display over there. Now, as you know, NATO is in a period of expansion. And the thinking is that they want to bring former Warsaw Pact nations into NATO because it will weaken Russia and strengthen NATO. Well, that's the conventional thinking, but it really is less than accurate. Because the reality is those former Warsaw Pact nations were actually a drain on the Soviet Union. Those Central European nations have always lacked the coherence and the industrial base and the combined economic infrastructure to generate significant industrial, financial, and most of all, military power. So NATO is basically repeating the mistakes of the Warsaw Pact. But of course, Russia is still very, very nervous about this, because they can see the U.S. and NATO are trying to surround Russia with these Russophobic, puppet-ruled governments. Now, the U.S. is very anxious over the upcoming meeting between Putin and Merkel to be held on September 18th in Berlin, because the U.S. government fears a unification of Russian resources and German technology. It would be formidable. And the U.S., of course, is pursuing its own interests. But the leader of the German Left Party and Bundestag deputy, Sarah Wagenknecht, in an interview with the Frankfurter Allgemeine newspaper, said the U.S. interests are contrary to European interests on the most important issues and not just the economic ones. With its wars for resources, the United States has destabilized the Middle East and continuing to do so in Iran. And Europe is indirectly having to pay for all this. And according to Wagon Connect, she's saying bad relations with Russia contradict Europe's interests. And so once again, all this sanctioning and tariffs and all the rest of it, it's pushing nations away from the United States sphere of influence and driving them toward Russia and China. All right, let's take a phone call from Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I wanted to talk about Russia, China, but at first, you heard of that Dave Hodges, the Common Sense show, right?
Yes.
Mike, I don't know. I think he's more loony than the Canadian currency at this point. He's saying like there's going to be martial law about the Cal exit, with California split. No, remember he said like 2 years ago how there's Russian Spetsnaz in the U.S. that are going to like knock the power.
Yeah, I tend not to link to his site.
Yeah, he's I don't know, man. He's wishy-washy, to say the least. I mean, I don't know. And, they always have an informant, they say, like, yeah, okay. Which makes me laugh. They always think they got somebody special that is telling this stuff. Trump's not going to... Listen, if California was going to split off, Trump would say, see ya. I would say see ya.
I thought that issue was dead. Well, you're talking Cal exit and not splitting the state into three parts. That latter one is now officially dead.
Yeah.
No, a Cal exit would trigger a new civil war. I mean, that's what triggered the last one. All these other states got sick and tired of an overbearing federal government, and they decided they wanted to go their own way. And we basically got into this civil war to reunify the nation, to bring the Confederacy back in, because the North was actually quite dependent on the South's industrial output, primarily cotton, and they needed those tax revenues. And that's really what the war was all about. Lincoln just used the issue of slavery to convince ordinary Americans to go on out and get shot on up for what was ultimately, as all wars are, economic.
Do you realize, though, if California split off, they'd be on their own. They wouldn't get no federal help with the wild. Like, look at the fires they got over there. That place would collapse so quick. It'd be like worse than Venezuela because they're so ignorant over there. They want to Cal exit. I'm like, well, you know what that means? You're on your own.
Well, a lot of people pushing for Cal exit are also the same ones saying that really California should go back to belonging to Mexico. There's a movement out there, I think it's called Azatlan or something like that, where that's been their agenda for years. They're saying that, forget about Sam Houston and General Santa Anna signing that paper that California really belongs to Mexico, which... if you look at how many Mexicans have now come over that border into there, it's looking more and more like it. Now, back when I lived in Southern California, California had a good economy. In fact, standing by itself, I think it was the world's 8th most powerful economy, but not anymore. They're in serious economic trouble. Too much debt, too much money flowing out, taking care of the illegal immigrants and the refugees. The infrastructure is failing. They don't have money to fix that. They're in serious trouble, but then so's the entire country.
Sounds like Sweden and Italy, huh?
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, what do you, remember when Cuomo the other day said that America's not that great?
Yeah.
America's never been. Did you see the people on Fox News, the woman? Did you see, she goes, what do you mean? We're great. We defeated communist Japan, which, even if these people read off a script, they're stupid. They can't get even straight reading off a script.
Yeah.
Reading off the teleprompter. Yeah, my God. She said, we defeated the Islamic radicals. I'm like, if that's true, then how come Islamic terrorism have increased, not only since 9/11, but since Iraq and all, it's increased tenfold.
Yep.
I mean, this is how much BS Fox News is to push, this agenda of don't question the flag, don't question anything, But, like, you know who defeated Islamic terrorism in Syria? Russia.
Yes.
Iran and Hezbollah and the Syrian army.
Yep.
That's who did it.
Yep.
The United States was dropping pamphlets. Remember that? Obama was dropping pamphlets.
Well, they
Yeah.
were
So, I mean-
parachuting in supplies to the Islamic terrorists. I mean, that's the real scandal behind that. ISIS and Al Qaeda were working for the United States. Getting on back to Cuomo, what he effectively said is things will not get better under the Democratic Party.
Like, I don't think things are going to get better with any party as it is now. As you see what's going on with, like, Turkey and Russia and Europe, and Europe's got a lot of issues. We can see that.
Yep.
You know, I mean, they got problems. But so do we. But, Mike, I wanted to talk about Trump also. What do you make of Larry Kudlow and all these people coming out saying how great the economy is, but nothing's been fixed? Nothing's been changed. But they're touting how we're on a roll, you know, and even Drudge Report is posting this stuff. I mean,
It's an election
does anybody
season.
actually believe?
It's an election season. Everybody's bragging and saying, we're doing a good job. The incumbents are always going to do it. But you're absolutely right. Paul Craig Roberts wrote an article, I think it was last week we were talking about it, where he says, we're not seeing the actual signs of an improving economy. And one issue that he put on out there is this claim of record low unemployment doesn't jive with the fact that wages and salaries are still stagnant. Because when you have record low unemployment, wages and salaries start being forced upward to attract, better workers to the workplace. That's not happening.
And Mike, real quick, I want to switch over to Russia using the Tu-160s and flying to that base. They're saying it's right next to, I mean, they're making it sound like they invaded Alaska. No. It's like,
well, we could ask
on.
Sarah Palin because she can see Russia from her front door.
I remember that.
Okay, Dustin, I got to put you on hold. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, Republic Broadcasting is standing here, hat in hand, begging for support. And we really need it. As everybody now sees, there's a war between corporate media and independent media. And we need your help. I mean, the big money is all behind the liars because they know the liars are going to make them more money. You can have truth is easy to come by, but, lying to the public is big business in the United States of America. They don't call it lying, they call it public relations or the evening news, but it's still lying. We're out here trying to get the truth to you. We're trying to keep you fully informed so you can make good choices, and we need your support because we're under attack. Our servers are under attack. They're going after our advertisers, and we just need your help. That's all I can say. This is very, very serious. So the postal address where you can send a check or money order, or if you prefer anonymity, cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number, if you want to make a debit or credit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber, is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during business hours, extension 3 at all other times. And before we go back to the phones here, I got this very funny email saying election season is that time when your country really does become the land of promise. All right, back to Dustin in New Jersey. You wanted to talk about Russia, I think.
Yeah, Sarah Palin. But before I go back to that, I want to say, nobody listened to the A to Z media, the alphabet soup media. You got to do your own research. Listen to Mike. He knows what he's talking about. Layla knows what she's talking about.
Yep.
Everybody calling in pretty much knows, except Mitch. Everybody knows what they're talking about. But you know what I mean, Mike. You got to. No,
I know what you mean.
You got to be critical thinkers.
Yes.
You got to think for yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, a thinking populace just scares the heck out of this government.
Rachel Maddow gets $30,000 a day. What do you think Sean Hannity, Jake Tapper, and all John Lemonhead's is getting paid? They're getting paid a lot of money to lie to you. That's why they're getting paid a lot of money.
That's absolutely right.
I want people.
they get huge amounts of money for being very convincing liars, for having gravitas, for being able to stand there with their hair on fire and insist convincingly they can't smell any smoke.
And that's coming from me. I used to be a former CNN, Fox News, MSNBC alcoholic. At the time, But I woke up, because you can figure out the lies after a while. You start to say this is crap.
Yes.
Well, hey, Mike, on Sarah Palin, is there anybody who actually voted for her and McCain? My God, I could see Russia from Alaska. She couldn't even see her own family's messed up. I mean, remember they had a fight at a party that everybody got beat up? I mean, she's whacked John McCain. I mean, who voted for those people?
I mean, she
they were, oh my God. I mean,
she basically launched her political career, being a beauty queen, and looking good in a bikini. And she won the election as mayor of this town, and she did such a bad job, the town council actually had to hire a city manager to do her job for her. And then, of course, she got to be governor again because she looks good in a bathing suit. And that's a lousy way to run a government, okay? We got to stop voting the fashion. We got to stop voting, what looks good. Because especially in politics, what looks good usually isn't very good at all.
Yep. Hey, Mike, remember Joe the plumber, the whole thing with John McCain? Oh, my God. I mean, that's something I don't want to remember, all that stuff.
Yeah.
What a joke, that whole... But, Mike, going back to Russia, Russia is saying, hey, man, they got the kickback hypersonic missiles that they got that do Mach 5 and all this other stuff, They're saying, hey, man, we can reach you. I mean, come on, man, knock it off and let's go to, let's talk. Let's go to the table. But, there's that element that don't want to talk. And, Mike, I still don't get with Trump. He got rid of John Brennan's security clearance, but why did he do all these people at once? Was he going to wait another 6 months to do James Clapper and Comey and
apparently,
I mean, you know what I mean.
Well, the White House is saying these other security clearances are under consideration. I still want to find out if Hillary Clinton still has her security clearance because she shouldn't. Because even if we take James Comey's testimony on that, or that statement on his press conference at face value, Hillary Clinton has a history of being careless with classified information. She should not have a security clearance.
None of them should, Mike. If you leave a corporation, does that mean you can just walk back into the building after you left? You know what I mean? There should be no access to any of that information. But you know what, Mike? The problem is there's a left behind.
Well,
the left behinds are going to leak all that.
Yeah, that's the problem there. Anyway, listen, Dustin, got to let you go. Got a bunch of callers waiting on the line, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go back to the telephones to Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Dustin made a good point. When you leave a company or corporation, or you leave the military, which is a corporation, I lost my security clearance, and I understand why. You leave the military and you hand that stuff over, and you can't just simply now enter the military base. I can't walk on the flight line and go to my old aircraft and walk on board because of all the sensitive, gadgetry, the instruments there. But that's reasonable to think that you lose your security clearance once you leave your job. No job lets you have authorization to come back in once you leave the job. And so I just can't understand why, this is a good opportunity to make that point, and nobody on the team should have any authorization, any security clearance any longer. If you're part of the old team, you can't have it. If you're part of the existing team, you get it. If you are not on the team any longer, you don't get your security clearance. So that's a good point to make, and I think that's what Donald Trump needs to say. We're handing out secret authorization to people that shouldn't have it. I mean, you talk about the military oath, protecting your country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, some of these people are not on the team any longer, and they're actually become the enemy of the state and enemy of the people. So good reason to now say this is it. We're going to now restrict the authorization and start pulling them. And you're legal to do so. You should be doing so.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. These people are definitely not friends of Trump, and the Trump White House has been plagued with all kinds of leaks ever since Trump came on in. It leaks like a colander, and these people who still have their security clearances are now able to access information, even though they no longer work for the government. Some of those may be the leakers. And again, it makes absolute sense. When you leave your job that requires a security clearance and you don't need that clearance anymore, it should be revoked. And you went through that, I went through that. It just makes common sense.
It does. It does. Hey, you also mentioned something about California splitting, and I had Paul Preston on my show from Agenda 21 Radio.
Okay,
and,
before we do that, I have a postscript on the security clearance issue. Remember Oppenheimer, who was instrumental in building the nuclear bomb? After the Manhattan Project was over, he lost his security clearance. He wasn't even allowed to look at papers he himself had written.
Wow. That is interesting.
Yep.
Okay, real quick here, somebody mentioned, I think maybe Dustin mentioned something about Agenda 21, or not Agenda 21, but New California, that's what it was.
Yeah.
I had Paul Preston on my show about 2 weeks ago, and he is very active in the New California project of the agenda there, looking at West Virginia as basically the base of being able to split up California there. And so anybody here, if your California listeners are listening in and want to get involved and know more what Paul Preston's doing, here's the website that is keeping you up to date. It's newcaliforniastate.com. And there's quite a bit going on in August with meetings and grouping and stuff like that. So just keep abroad what's going on there. newcaliforniastate.com. That's it.
Okay, I'm going to post a link to it right now. Anything else, Steve?
That's it for me. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. We're going to switch over to Layla in Ontario. Aloha, Layla. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. This is a little late, but it's about the British involvement in the U.S. Civil War. Apparently, their economy grew during the U.S. Civil War, and some of the reasons are that the Brits, even though they controlled India and Egypt, they also wanted the cotton from the South.
Yes.
Furthermore, they were able to sell all of the equipment, guns, cannons, rifles, bullets, uniforms, steel plating, engines, all sorts of things that are needed during a war. And then secondly, both North and South needed to sell bonds on the international markets to raise money for the war. And Britain was the holder of these bonds. Then again, there were also something like huge numbers of thousands of Brits who came over as volunteers. In fact, even as surgeons, the name Mayo is one of those that still survives very famously in the U.S. And I personally often wonder if the negotiators, made a deal with the Americans: if we help you out, do not invade our colony in Canada, because there were a few on the fringe, there were some who tried to invade Canada and failed. So
well,
that's
at
all
one point, Canada tried to invade the U.S. and failed. But with regard to the financing of the Civil War...
Canada failed, but anything to do. I'm sorry, Canada's imperial plans are a joke. Forgive me.
Well, they did manage to burn the White House, which is why it's white instead of its original blue color. Getting on back to the financing, the fact of the matter is that the European bankers, which included Great Britain, were not at all sympathetic to the Union because of Lincoln's greenback. Lincoln did not want to put the nation into debt to fight the war. And so he invoked his authority as president to issue a new currency called the greenback. And it worked so well that Lincoln planned to continue the practice after the Civil War was over. I mean, some of the vitriol that was coming out of the European press regarding Lincoln's banknotes. I mean, if you read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, there's a quote in there from the London media saying this has to be destroyed. So the bondholders in Europe were definitely not on the side of the Union.
Maybe not in Europe, but I think Britain is always considered a continent separate from Britain. But wasn't Lincoln heavily tied up with a lot of the industrialists that built the railroad. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've done that reading. I don't have anything in front of me that I can refer to.
Well, as president, certainly he was. Before that, I think only tangentially. I mean, he was basically a lawyer, and then he got into politics. But obviously, as president, he would have or should have had close relations with all kinds of industrialists.
Well, a guy from a log cabin out of nowhere who was abandoned by his father and disliked by his stepmother becomes president. Somebody had to finance his rise. It wasn't just his marvelous eloquence. So I would wonder who it was. And like anybody who's recruited to become a leader, somebody has to be bankrolling you.
Well, you also need to remember that back in Lincoln's time, elections were a lot less expensive. It was basically newspaper coverage and railroad trips, train trips, whistle stopping. And it was on those railroad trips that apparently I read there was an assassination attempt against Lincoln. Yes. But that those who were behind him were able to help him evade the assassination attempt. I mean, there's very little of what, I don't care what it is, whether it's ancient history or very recent history. We only know what we're told. And there are a lot of contradictions in the things that we read. Yes. And there's very little for us to actually verify. Unless we ourselves are eyewitnesses to events, we rely on other people's versions. And whether or not it was innocent misinterpretation, nothing is ever really known for certain unless we were there. Yes.
Wasn't that the title of one of those? And you were there. Was that who was that famous? Anyway,
you were there, and I don't know. I'm thinking it may have been Walter Cronkite who did that.
Yeah, I think it was Cronkite. The other one I was thinking of is the one who preceded him, the one who had the affair with Churchill's daughter-in-law. That Churchill used as a courtesan. You're familiar with her and her role in also building up Bill Clinton?
Actually, not really. Anyway, Layla, I got to let you go. Got a bunch of callers waiting on the line. Got a lot of news to get through before the Lady Claire shows up here. So thank you for the phone call. Don't forget, you're our third hour guest next Wednesday, and we're going to switch to Jesse in Houston. Aloha, Jesse. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello?
Hey, you're on the air. Yeah, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Ready? I wanted to talk about the economy. Yes. And how, there's really no getting out of a situation once you're in it. I'm 26 now, and I met my wife when I was just turning 18, and at that time we didn't have no jobs or anything. We finally found a job, and through this capitalist system, you're supposed to grow over time, I guess financially or whatever. And we are basically in the same boat that we were in when we were 18, and it's been about 10 years now. Yes, almost. And she has a job and I have a job. We are both working, and we are not even able to stack up a little bit of money for ourselves. Yep. Things keep happening in order for us to have to waste all of our money, especially when income tax season comes. Yes. All the bills and I get pulled over a lot because I don't have a license. When I was 16, I got my license revoked because I was driving, and ever since then I haven't been able to get my license. So now I'm constantly getting pulled over, and I'm not even able to drive. And that's the other point I wanted to get to really quick, was that I'm not able to get my license, and I'm actually a citizen. I'm half black, African American. I'm also half Mexican American, and I'm unable to get my license. It's just not. I'm unable to happen. Every time I go to the DMV, it doesn't happen. And everywhere I go, and I live in a small area here in Houston, and there's, so many immigrants or illegals or whatever you want to call them. And I'm not racist or anything, but they're just driving in their cars, and some of them don't even know how to drive. and they're just like nothing. I mean, I can't even explain it because I get so irritated about how these guys they're going around doing whatever they want, and they don't get nothing. I mean, they get pulled over and they don't even get like deported or anything like. And I hear you talking about this all the time. I'm a 2-year listener, and a first-time caller, and I hear you talking about this all the time about how they're just doing. They might as well just get rid of that Section 8 thing you've been talking about, how the laws against the immigration or whatever.
They're not being enforced, there's no question about it. Okay, well, listen, Jesse, I deeply empathize with the situation that you and your wife are in. And all I can say to you is you didn't deserve to be put in this situation. You didn't do anything wrong. It was done to you. And it's being done to you by the money junkies in Wall Street. It's being done to you by the government that has basically put us in a wartime economy where we're all struggling to just get by. Meanwhile, we're being fed these lies about what a great economy it is and how, unemployment is at record lows and the usual kind of bovine excrement we get fed going into an election. So, Jesse, all I can say is I wish you good luck, especially about getting back your driver's license, because, without that, I can understand you're in a world of hurt.
I might as well be an immigrant.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I said I might as well be an immigrant. Like you said about the businesses, I live in like I said, a small part in Houston. It's actually called Bay Cliff. And from here to actual Houston, the town, there's little shopping centers, and there's about, maybe about 7 or 8 stores in each shopping center, and maybe about 4 of them are open, and the rest are all, leasing.
Yeah,
ready to lease.
We're seeing that here. In fact, Claire and I, we don't eat out a lot because of our economic realities, but because last night was the first night of choir for this season, we decided Claire didn't, want to cook. I didn't want her to cook either because of her back issue. And we used to go down the bottom of the hill to Tony Roma's. And we went on down there and walked up, closed, gone out of business. Not only that, a second restaurant in the same shopping center, just tin-foiled over the windows. They're dropping like flies. The economy is in horrible, horrible shape. And ordinary Americans like you and I, we don't have any more money to pump back into it. And that's just the hard reality. Anyway, Jesse, good luck. I hope things get better for you. And let's switch over to Keith Rogers.
One more thing. One more thing. Real quick.
Quick.
Oh, he hung up on me. Oh, okay. I just want to say, listening to your radio show has opened my mind up so much. And listening to Layla, Dustin, all you guys are really, really good, and I just want to say I love listening to your show, and I'm listening every day.
Well, thank you, Mike,
and I'm gonna let you go.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Keith Rogers. Keith, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind?
Well, actually, if you want to hold me over after your break there, which is coming up right away.
Well, we got about 2 minutes where you can talk, and then I'll take you over the commercial break. Okay. So you've got time to start.
Well, that's all right. Yeah, I was going to tell you here, there's a new video on YouTube on Randy Weaver. It's from up in Kalispell. It's on YouTube there. And it's an awesome video to watch exactly what his entire family went to as eyewitnessing, from all the events, what he had to go through in court, all that stuff. The title of the video is Randy Weaver from Ruby Ridge, live from Montana. And like I say, it's a darn good video. Anyway, the reason I called, though, is on my show, I always try to do human interest stuff on Sundays as a plug for the show. Anyway, there's this nice Jewish kid here. He's a former IDF soldier. He's over here in our area picking melons and stuff like that. And I got to talking with him around the campfire before they went to level 2 restrictions on fires. But anyway, I got talking to him about a little bit of history and stuff. And he didn't know a lot of stuff. And I kind of threw out this thing about, Hitler didn't kill anyone. And he looked at me really weird. And I says, Mao didn't kill anyone. Pol Pot didn't kill anyone. George Bush didn't kill anyone, And I kind of went down this thing, and he kind of looked at me kind of weird like that. And I says, it was those people that were out there just following orders. and he mumbled something in Hebrew. And I looked at his, he has a little French girlfriend, it's really cute. And I says, what does that translate to? And she said, grunts. He caught on, see? But, you know, these are these human interest things where people go out and they do things. And so that's why I get so, you know, when I've ever talked to you for how many years now about pluralisms, you know, like our country, our military, stuff like that, all this stuff is being done in our names and stuff, you know, and a lot of people don't realize what's going on. And then like the soldier today, they go out and they do all the dirty work, and these guys are out golfing while they're doing the dirty work. All right.
Well, listen, Keith, I got to put you on hold. Don't hang up. We got to take a break for commercials, and I'll come right back to you. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking at Fox News right now, and they're running a story. Neil Cavuto is doing this thing about how tomorrow is the most popular day to have a wedding on, which I couldn't go on living without knowing that, right? So as good as Fox News has been with like Hannity and Tucker Carlson, it seems to be deteriorating rapidly as well. All right, let's go back to the phones. We're talking with Keith Rogers, and you're absolutely right that all these people that we've been taught to revile, like Mao or Pol Pot or Adolf Hitler, didn't kill anyone themselves personally, although in theory we're told Hitler shot himself. That may also be another lie. But it was all those people that were gathered around them that just sold their souls for slogans and for wishful thinking. And we're seeing the same thing happening in this country right now with groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter, who are out there openly saying, yeah, it's okay for us to be violent with those we disagree with.
Right. Well, my show highlights for Sunday is going to be basically the selling of a president. You know, it's like Obama's Hope and Change, Trump's Make America Great Again. But, you know, this is the premise behind this, Mike, and I don't like to cut into your show or anything like that, but you and I are old enough to know that out of the decades of living like that, we have watched this country continually go downhill. Mm-hmm. We have millions of starving, tens of millions of jobless, millions of homeless. And has any of that ever been reversed? No. Like I say, these politicians out doing their golfing, we find out with the massive, even if you got scan through your webpage right now, we see the massive corporate fraud, the insider trading that's going on.
Yep.
These are the same politicians that are elected into office, and nothing's getting done. Just as much as Trump out there tweeting away like mad, he should be out there fixing the economy, but they've got him so diverted on this other crap, you know.
Well, that's definitely one issue where, you know, he's having to fend off these political attacks. But the other side of it may be that I don't think this economy can be fixed. And I think what we're seeing right now
you're right.
Is those who have the ability to do so are simply looting the system. In fact, over at our online store, we have a coffee mug that says the last official act of any government is to loot the nation. And that is, I think, the stage we've reached. And I made that coffee cup like years and years and years ago, but it's certainly relevant today.
Yeah, and did you see that I sent you an email about that satanic statue they erected over there in that City Hall Square there?
Yep.
You know, this is the point, though. The country is going downhill morality-wise is the worst portion like that. But when I sit here and I think of like Americans. It's a weekend coming up here, barbecues, all stuff like that. In the meantime, those people acting under the just following orders are out there bombing thousands of people to death, regardless of what country they belong in, like that. And this country, all people can worry about is plastic straws being banned in California.
Yeah, I know.
What priorities, you know?
Okay. Anyway, listen.
I love you. Okay.
All right, Keith. Got to let you go. And we'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, as you're already well aware, that's right, the PC people say I'm not supposed to say that anymore. Okay. But corporate media has been dishing out not just the Russophobia, but Putinophobia as hard as they can. They're just trying to sell the American people on the idea that Russia's bad, we're back in the days of the Cold War, and you're just going to have to learn how to do without things like food and housing so that the war machine can be ready to defend us from the evil Russians. And we went through this back during the 50s and 60s, and except for the near miss over the Cuban Missile Crisis, war between the Soviet Union and the United States never happened. But they're starting to really come out with this Putinophobia. They're trying to sell the idea that he is Jack the Ripper, Stalin, Adolf Hitler, and Pol Pot, and the Wolfman all rolled into one. Putin gets blamed for everything. Putin is behind the rigged polls. Putin is behind syringes that go astray. Putin is behind vaccines that don't work. Putin is behind solar flares, air pollution. Putin is causing global warming, so forth and so on. And basically, it's Putin the bogeyman, Putin the bad, over and over and over again. So, over in France, on France 2, which is a state organization, they came on out broadcasting a completely fake report on the holidays of the Russian president. And they basically had a picture of Vladimir Putin with posing in front of a tiger on the ground, just lying on the ground, and said, you know, Putin, he's tiger hunting in Siberia. And as it turns out, the images are from 10 years ago. And it had nothing to do with a holiday or a tiger hunt. It was when Putin reintroduced the animal into northern Siberia as part of the Tiger of Love program. In other words, trying to repopulate the species. But they'll grab any picture and just put a comment on it and try and sell you on the idea. In fact, down in Nicaragua, the media is showing this picture claiming it's this huge anti-government protest, and it turned out the actual picture was a pro-government rally. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. James in Charlotte, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Mike. Yeah, just something I don't know if you had happened to come across this or not, and if you're interested, I can send it to you. Just 4 years and a few days ago, on July 31st, 2014 to be exact, the Washington Post had a editorial calling for John Brennan, calling for Obama to fire John Brennan. Mm-hmm. Because of the fact that he had hacked into the Senate Intelligence Committee's secure computer system and scanned documents and emails, and then lied about it for nearly 3 months.
Yes,
where he was finally forced to admit that he had done it, and they're quite adamant that about that he should be fired. And now here we are 4 years later, and the people who religiously read and go by the what the Washington Post says are now defending Brennan.
Yeah, and it's amazing because a lot of those people that Brennan spied on, and by the way, they spied on that Senate committee because it was investigating the CIA. And a lot of those people that were being spied on by Brennan are now defending him. So, again, apparently this Trump derangement syndrome carries with it a certain amnesiac aspect where people forget all the bad things that have been done to him, in the past, or it doesn't really matter. We just got to get Trump. We got to get Trump. We got to get Trump.
Yeah. I can send you that editorial, or you can easily find it.
I'm sure I can find it, and I do remember that incident. That was outrageous behavior by the CIA, and it does indicate that the CIA is out of control and it's rogue and it doesn't consider itself answerable to Congress.
Yeah. Oh, another thing I happen to recall, Rand Paul in an interview mentioned a couple of other things that where Brennan was a bit loose-lipped in letting some classified information out that put a couple of CIA field agents in jeopardy.
Yes.
So he was pretty sloppy. He was not at all competent in his job.
Well, you know, the Peter Principle applies to government as well as to any other, you know, large hierarchical organization. Everybody gets promoted to their level of incompetency. Yeah.
Well, that's all I had. I thought you might find that article interesting and probably some of the listeners might want to take a look at it.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, over in Ukraine, they're preparing a draft of a new law that will basically ban all railroad communications with Russia. In other words, they want to basically just block the tracks, no more trains going back and forth from anywhere in Ukraine to anywhere in Russia. And this looks like a tantrum being thrown over Russia's new bridge to Crimea and the launch of that new ferry service between Crimea and Turkey. So Ukraine is going the opposite direction of Korea. The Koreas are restarting their roads and railroad lines across the DMZ. By the way, something a lot of people may not understand, Theresa May is out there at the forefront saying, yes, we've got to have war, we've got to do this, we've got to go bomb Syria, we've got to do the rest of it. You need to pay attention to her husband, Philip May. He's a banker and pension fund expert. He's a senior executive at Capital Group, which is a U.S. investment company controlling $1.4 trillion in assets. And Capital Group proudly proclaim they are significant shareholders in weapons manufacturer Lockheed Martin and are the largest shareholders in BAE Systems. And these are companies that are world leaders when it comes to profiting from death and destruction. So that explains at least part of Theresa's militarism. You know, we got to bomb somebody today. My husband needs to make more money. Speaking of the CIA, there's a report in Foreign Policy that reveals that up to 30, that's 30, CIA agents and assets working in China were identified and executed by Chinese counterintelligence over a 2-year period after the CIA's encrypted communication system was infiltrated. Now, what appears to have happened is that the CIA had imported the encrypted communication system from the Middle East, where the online environment is less hazardous, and apparently they underestimated China's ability to penetrate it. Maybe CIA should have used my 10,000 monkeys code. But apparently this is being seen as one of the CIA's worst failures ever. So, getting back to Korea, as I mentioned before, they're rejoining their railroads and their roads. North Korea is now pressing a demand for a formal end of the Korean War amid talk of yet another visit by Mike Pompeo. South Korea is proposing broader economic cooperation with the North. I think I called this one correctly. They're going to rush to reunification. And after that, North Korea won't need nuclear weapons. The Korean War will be over. And that will be another U.S. foreign policy failure. America's leaders like to go around, we've never lost a war, we've never lost a war. Well, we've certainly lost in Vietnam. And we certainly didn't win in Korea. We appear to be losing in Syria, and we're not doing all that well in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is what makes getting ready to start yet another war in Iran problematic, in my opinion here. Apparently down in East Jerusalem, Israel bulldozers have demolished yet another Palestinian residential building in the neighborhood of Issawiah and just knocked it down, went on in, said, you're out of here. Now remember, this is East Jerusalem, which is not officially part of Israel. And under international law, what Israel is doing is illegal. But Israel is never held to account. Now, here's an article that came out of Zero Hedge, and it's echoing something that I mentioned a while back about how America's approach to foreign policy is getting more and more bullying and threatening. And so this article is called America the Punitive. And it says there's been this dramatic shift in how the United States government carries out its business internationally. Now, Washington has always had a tendency to employ some force to get what it wants, especially since 9/11. But it used to recognize other countries had legitimate interest and accepted there was a place for diplomacy to resolve issues short of armed conflict. But that seems to have gone away. And I think the reason the diplomacy is fading away, outside of just the war hawks being war hawks, what have we got to negotiate with? Our manufacturing has been in decline for 30 years. We're not making products the rest of the world wants to buy. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And now other countries don't want to even use our US dollar anymore. The U.S. doesn't have much left to negotiate with. So what do? They rattle the sabers and they brandish the swords and they make threats. If you are like me, especially if you're an aviation buff, and as I've mentioned many times before, I don't play computer games with the exception of flight simulators. We all love the Blue Angels. And once a year they do come out here to Hawaii, and Claire and I have made a point of going on down to see them. Boy, there's a lot of sirens out there. Something's going on down the bottom of the hill. Anyway, the Blue Angels are getting an upgrade to their aircraft. They're moving from the F-18 Hornet to the Super Hornets. And they decided to take a pass on the F-35, which I think was a smart thing to do. And it was time for them to get out of those Hornets because they've been out of production for so long. Parts are hard to find. I saw this documentary on the Blue Angels about how the ground crews had to scramble to keep those aircraft in the air. So they're going to get Super Hornets and go on flying. And they are fun to watch. And I understand they're up there to recruit people to the Navy. But they're still fun to watch. And I'm opposed to war, but some of the toys they have are pretty cool. All right, so today was the day that over 300 media outlets, 343 to be precise, joined this Boston Globe campaign and published editorials denouncing Trump's war on the free press, which is not what Trump is about. He's not fighting against a free press, he's fighting against a lying press. And the Twitter response has been that these 343 media outlets with this coordinated campaign to smear the president just proved that Trump is right. It proved that the corporate media is out to get him. And the corporate media is just screaming over Trump's calling them the enemy of the people. Well, if you're lying to us, you are not our friends. And that really is what it comes down to. Nobody likes a liar. Meanwhile, the Senate on Thursday went on record declaring that the press is not the enemy of the people. Well, by golly, that settles it then. End of that debate. If the senators are saying it, it must be true. A little bit of good news coming out of Judicial Watch. After a Herculean effort through the court system, against a government that is stonewalling as hard as they can, Judicial Watch uncovered 5 more Clinton emails from her private email server containing classified information. And Judicial Watch is calling on Jeff Sessions to order a new criminal investigation, which Sessions isn't going to do because he's just as corrupt as his predecessor. And I agree with those who are saying Trump ought to fire him. Trump needs to fire all these top people in Department of Justice and FBI, and he needs to bring in real outsiders, people from outside the Beltway who are not tangled up in all this corruption. That's what Trump needs to do, and he needed to do it 10 months ago. Now, another story, this one's coming out of sarahcarter.com. Apparently, the Bruce Orr texts and emails are revealing that Christopher Steele, while he was writing that bogus dossier, maintained deep ties to the Obama Department of Justice and the FBI. And apparently, one of the emails is saying that Obama wanted to hear everything that was going on. So now we know that this bogus Russian dossier scandal goes all the way up to the top, to Obama himself. Speaking of Brennan, he's still on the warpath over losing his security clearance, and he wrote an op-ed over at the New York Slimes, basically saying that there's absolutely no question that Trump was colluding with Russia, and I will not be silenced, and all this other bellicosity that was coming out of him. Okay, show us the proof that Trump and Russia colluded, because Mueller has had 18 months and millions of dollars, and he's come up with zip, zero, nada, nothing. Now, over on the Hannity program, Mark Levin came on out and said Trump should pull more security clearances, and he's absolutely right. There's no reason for these people to have these clearances when they are no longer in government service. If they get hired back, you can reissue the clearance. They've already gone through the background checks. And I still want to know if Hillary Clinton still has her security clearance and why she's not on the list of people being considered to have that security clearance revoked. Because according to former FBI Director James Comey, she's very careless with classified information. She didn't mean to do wrong. She's just careless. Well, being careless with classified information is still a Title 18 violation. Now, a Pentagon whistleblower who basically complained about questionable government contracts with both FBI informant Stephen Halper and a company headed by Chelsea Clinton's best friend has been stripped of his security clearance. And apparently, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she set up meetings for this company headed by Chelsea Clinton's best friend. So, see, they are taking away security clearances here. Speaking of whistleblowers, another whistleblower has come forward saying that the IRS has been tipping off members of Congress to corporate takeovers so the elected officials could then profit from the insider trading. And the whistleblower is saying that higher level employees of the IRS are also using that information to enrich themselves. That's insider trading. Now, this article is saying up until a few years ago, members of Congress were allowed to trade stock based on information they got while performing their public duties. No, they weren't. Insider trading is insider trading. All right. Donald Trump wants Jeff Sessions to arrest Omarosa. Trump, she's had her 15 minutes of fame. Don't swing at the mud balls on this one. Just let it go. I mean, you're already suing her for violating her non-disclosure agreement. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, apparently in Washington, D.C., the scandal surrounding the FBI is about to break through the dam, as it were. And I'm sure the government is looking out into the heartland and realizing the American people are very upset about this and should be upset about it. This is probably the biggest scandal to hit the FBI since COINTELPRO. And now even Lindsey Graham is saying there needs to be a second special counsel to investigate the FBI. That is a significant development. So we're looking at Russiagate, And it was just about a year ago that Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity published its report on the intrusions into the Democratic Party's mail servers and basically said it was a leak, not a hack, because of the metadata on the files. They could not have been taken out over the internet at that rate of speed. They were copied to a USB device and simply walked out of the building. And nobody to date has been able to discredit that conclusion. And yet, what do we get from the corporate media, not to mention the Democrats? Russia did it. Russia hacking. Russia's to blame for everything. We have a new tropical storm bearing down on our island right now. I'm sure Russia's behind that with their secret weather weapons here. Democratic National Committee Chairman Tom Perez delivered remarks to supporters at an indoor Latin mall in Atlanta, Georgia this week. 9 people showed up. So I'm sure they're going to get out the vote among the illegals and the dead people. And apparently, the Democrats' lead on the November election has dropped again, leaving the two parties tied. And the Democratic poll numbers are still trending down. The trend is my friend. And what's at stake here, and this is why everybody needs to get on out and vote, not so much for the GOP, but against the Democrats. If they seize control of the House of Representatives, they will immediately shut down all of these investigations into the Department of Justice, into the Clinton Foundation, into the FBI, all of it. They'll just shut it all down. They'll launch a whole bunch of new, completely bogus investigations against Donald Trump, and they will try and impeach him, even though they don't actually have an impeachable offense. That is what is at stake. Now, you remember back when Donald Trump announced he wanted to have a military parade, like they have in other countries like, well, Russia and China and everything. And the estimate for the parade is now at $92 million, which is $80 million more than the earlier estimate. And as a result, this idea of a parade has now been canceled. And Trump is basically blaming the local Washington, D.C. lawmakers for these ballooning costs that led to the cancellation. So poor Donald does not get his parade. I don't think it's a good image for America. I mean, the world knows we're a warmongering, war-making country. But a military parade, that's generally a sign that, yeah, you've gone on over, we're a warrior society, we're coming to get you. Over at CNN, Chris Cuomo has announced CNN refuses to condemn political violence against anyone it defines as bigots. He's saying Antifa's violence against bigots is the right thing to do. And he's basically declaring open season on all Trump supporters, conservatives in general. We're getting into a very, very dangerous situation here, where corporate media is inciting this. Now, I didn't see Chris Cuomo's report on this for myself. I just heard about it because I was too busy watching SpongeBob SquarePants. Alrighty, we're coming up here on another commercial break. We've got a caller waiting on the line. We're going to take that call as soon as we come back after these words from our sponsors. And we are half an hour away from the lovely Lady Claire. So we'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And interestingly enough, this story just now came in. CNN has now sued the government for the names and home addresses of the Manafort jurors. Now, that's a very alarming development. Remember, the jurors ended their first day of deliberation without reaching any verdicts, and they sent some messages to the judge, including a clarification on what reasonable doubt means, which would signal that maybe they're not thinking of convicting, or at least not on all the charges. Now, if Manafort were to be acquitted, it would be a huge embarrassment to the deep state and to the corporate media, which basically has been treating him like he's guilty, guilty, guilty. So for CNN to try and sue the government for these names and home addresses, the judge has to turn it down. It opens these jurors up to harassment. You know, after the trial is over and the verdict has been rendered, it's appropriate for CNN to interview them. Anyway, we're going to take a phone call. Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Francis. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello to you both.
Thank you.
And a big shout out to and a big shout out to Claire. Hey, gal. I have a thought for you. You mentioned about that Trump was supposed to have done a lot of house cleaning back about 10 months ago, as it were.
Yes.
Even though there's a lot of shenanigans going on where people are not getting their security clearance revoked or whatever have you, wasn't back when he did a photo op making a comment about a big storm was coming and so forth, which was shortly after he got into office, for that matter. I could be wrong about that because I know it was definitely more than 10 months ago, for that matter. But the question here is that who is actually behind a lot of the non-security revocations, for that matter, of the high security clearance, the various individuals, and two, who's handling the purse strings of the said people? Because the question is, what is Pence doing behind the scenes? Is he behind all this? Is he pulling purse strings? Is he pulling some shenanigans and so forth to make sure various individuals keep theirs, for that matter, for who knows what purpose? Because it seems like a lot of garbage is going on behind Trump's back, that he's being told, well, this is great, this is fine, this is being done, and you're going to look great, and so forth and so on, patting his ego or stroking his ego, for that matter. And so, as a result, Pence is basically getting away with murder, not dissimilar to Darth Cheney during the Trump Jr.'s tenure, for that matter, first and second terms, for that matter. And so the question is, who's kidding who? Who's doing the cord pulling and money doling out and so forth ad nauseum? That this stuff is still lingering on, for that matter. I mean, you can quote this section, that section of government terminology and so forth, but unless they actually go and start doing stuff and not just taking the words for it by the staff, given staff members or whoever, NSA, you name it, FBI, ad nauseum, as far as alphabet soup goes, it's just getting absurd and ridiculous. And so until things actually start happening, are you kidding me? I wouldn't trust this guy with my grandmother.
Well, don't sugarcoat it like that. Tell us how you really feel. Here, let's sort of simplify things down here. I've been saying that probably one of the reasons that these people all want to maintain their security clearances is they have access to information which they can then leak to the media. But the other aspect we need to look at is that these people appear to all be part of that core of the deep state, and they need to maintain that access to classified information so that they can basically keep an eye on what the Trump administration may be planning on doing to deal with the deep state. And I think that really is why Brennan has just gone so ballistic on this, because he's now cut off from being able to find out what Trump is planning on doing, and that's made him very upset. As far as who's doing it, we know that Trump was the one who initiated the idea of pulling the security clearances, and from then on, it's just a process where, you know, I mean, there's already a mechanism in place to revoke a security clearance, as we reported with that story about the whistleblower. So it's just a phone call. There's not a lot of money involved in it. But as far as what the people involved in the scandals at FBI and Department of Justice are concerned, they got a lot of money. They don't need a lot of outside money coming in. They simply divert funds from other areas to fund whatever it is they're doing. Or, as was the case in the Christopher Steele dossier, they get other people to pay it, like the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. It's a very complex, dark web, probably like the Gordian knot. And ultimately, Trump is going to have to use Alexander the Great's solution to deal with that Gordian knot of corruption in Washington, D.C., I think.
then remains the question, what is Pence's position in all this whole fiasco? And what is he doing behind the scenes?
I think he's just in a holding pattern because, you know, he obviously knows that if Trump is taken down, he gets to be the president. And right now, I think he's mostly concerned with not making himself a target. Because there are actually Democrats in Congress who are saying that both Trump and Pence ought to be impeached together. Now, Pence hasn't done anything. You know, there are still people out there who are insisting that Trump and Pence ought to be taken out of the White House and Hillary Clinton still put in. I mean, that's how ridiculous this situation is getting. But I think Pence is just keeping a low profile. I mean, he did have a high profile for like the first year of the administration. But I think right now he's just sort of staying in the background and he's staying out of the spotlight, mostly because he wants to preserve his chances of being the president if Trump is taken down.
And he's just as low a snake as anybody else is in D.C.
That's
okay,
true.
With that,
I think you just insulted snakes. All right, I think you just insulted snakes. Let's switch to Scott in California. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, hello, Michael. Gee, it just occurred to me it's Kaonohi Friday.
Yes. It's also Statehood Day here in Hawaii.
Yeah. It's what day?
It's Statehood Day here in Hawaii, the day when the U.S. government stole this place.
I'm familiar with the story. You know, I used to work for a shipping company running over there. So on Friday was Kaonohi Day, and that meant work finished. So you just let the guys go. The necessary work is done. Yeah, I caught that thing. They had the U.S. Marines on those ships out in the harbor, and the business guys told them, just go seize the palace, bypassing Congress like they would normally do. Anyway, what I was calling about, I just learned that, I don't know if you ever listened to Guns and Butter, Bonnie Faulkner on KPFA out of Berkeley.
No, I haven't.
Oh, my goodness. That was the first place where I started hearing 911 truth. And she's been there for 10, 12 years now, maybe. And they just booted her off just today or yesterday, no more shows, because she played an interview with Alan Zabrowski, you know, talking about Zionists, and end of story, she's gone. Yeah, amazing. So I thought, you know, they've joined that Ministry of Truth along with Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, the liberals in general have just declared war on conservatives, and my concern is it could actually break out into a real war when you have even the corporate media saying that violence by Antifa and Black Lives Matter is now acceptable. Okay, Scott, you there? Oh, I guess he hung up. All right, so let's get to the economic news here. A lot of foreign investors, a lot of foreign governments are starting to dump their U.S. treasuries, and it's causing a bit of a problem. But because of Trump's budget, especially the military budget, the U.S. government has run up another $1.36 trillion of brand new national debt over the past 12 months. And people are starting to wonder who's actually buying this, because it doesn't really look like a good investment anymore. Russia is getting rid of their treasury holdings. They've really slashed them. And it looks like, well, let me give you the rundown about where the debt is going. Ireland has $300 billion of U.S. debt. Brazil has $300 billion. The City of London, $274 billion. Switzerland, $236 billion. They've basically been spreading it around a lot. But the issue here is that it's not looking like a good investment anymore. There's a treasury bond bubble out there. Now, the treasury bonds are basically a pledge by the United States government to tax future generations of Americans, to take money away from them and give them absolutely nothing in return, and give that money to the holder of the treasury bond. And that is how the ultra-rich get richer at your expense, courtesy of the Federal Reserve. But they're having trouble selling these treasury bonds. Now, the Federal Reserve has bought a huge number of them. They're one of the major holders of Treasury bonds. It's easy for them to do. They just print up new money and they buy the Treasury bonds here. But according to this article over in Blacklisted News, the U.S. government is out there saying that they need more domestic bond buyers, that they need more Americans to start buying these bonds to try and deal with keeping the government financed. And if you're old enough to remember the wars, you will understand that bond drives were used to finance the war. So this is a very worrisome development here. Uncle Sam wants you to buy bonds. Report by Economic Policy Institute is showing that top managers of corporations are getting higher compensation every year. In fact, it's surging dramatically, while ordinary workers are getting no significant pay raise. All the gains in productivity and efficiency are going to those top managers. It was like I was saying to that caller earlier in the show. They know they can't save the economy. They're just going to get what they can get while the getting is good, and then they're going to head for the door. Now, U.S.-based payday loan giants Curo, QuickQuid, and Lending Stream operate in Britain, but they're based here in the United States. They're in legal trouble, and they're looking at a major scandal. They're accused of mis-selling loans to up to 1 million Britons. Now, paydayrefunds.co.uk are preparing legal action against QuickQuid, Curo, and Lending Stream after the U.S. payday lending giants have so far refused to disclose information on customers who could be due tens of millions of pounds back in compensation. Now, these payday loans are a perfect example of vulture capitalism. You get a population, mired in debt, struggling paycheck to paycheck, and then you make money off of that. It's legalized loan sharking is what it is when you look at the usurious interest rates on these payday loans. Loan sharking used to be illegal in this country, but here you go. Near Pittsburgh, there's this apartment complex, and the owners wanted to take out a mortgage on the building. And in order to get the mortgage, which was a $45.8 million loan, they had to make the building look like it was fully occupied, like it was generating rental income. And so they went into the vacant units, they turned on radios, they put shoes and doormats outside the doors. In one instance, they literally hired people to stand inside the door. And when the mortgage company inspectors came to look inside, she said, well, my boyfriend is asleep inside. And so they got this $45.8 million loan, which was then wrapped into mortgage securities and sold to investors. Here we go again, another mortgage-backed security fraud. And it's even starting with a fraud. They falsified the income from these commercial properties. The mortgage is going to default unless there's a sudden miracle and they fill up the building. So now Baghdad is very unhappy with the United States over the United States sanctions with Iran, and that might sound a little odd when you realize it wasn't all that long ago that Iran and Iraq were at war with each other, instigated by the United States. But the problem here is that Iraq and Iran share a very large common border over which a great deal of trade has been taking place as Iraq rebuilds from the U.S. war. And because of the U.S. sanctions on Iran, that is now shutting down. So Iraq is saying they will abide with the sanctions only for dollar transactions. They're going to start using their national currencies. I keep saying it over and over again. All these sanctions are doing is isolating the United States politically and economically. Story out of awarenessjunkie.com. I like that name. Chronic homelessness in one of the world's richest countries. The United States is still one of the wealthiest countries on earth. It's the wealthiest country in North America, but all that wealth is focused at the very, very top in the pockets of the billionaires. And we have a massive hunger and homeless problem all across the country. And like everything else, it's being taken advantage of. New York City is spending more on its Department of Homeless Services than it does on its fire department or its Department of Health. And yet the homeless problem is getting worse. Basically, the $2.06 billion on homeless services, there are 61,000 homeless people in the city. That is basically $33,000 per homeless person. Now, for that chunk of money, you should be able to get them off the streets and into an apartment and try and find some gainful employment. But the money just seems to be going in there and not coming out, certainly not to the homeless. Right now, New York City has more homeless people than any other city in the United States of America. Now, Tesla's in trouble. Even Fox News was running a story about that. Apparently, Elon Musk gave out an interview to the New York Times where he basically said he's ready for somebody else to take over his job. He admitted he needs Ambien to sleep. Friends are worrying about his health. So it looks like Elon Musk is in trouble there. Anyway, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I see that a lot of independent media outlets are equally outraged over this CNN attempt to get the names and home addresses of the Manafort jurors. And apparently, the judge in the case announced in court he has been threatened. He is receiving threats. So this country is getting so ugly. Okay, over in Italy, far left anarchist extremists have taken credit for the bombing of an office of the populist Lega party. And police found and disarmed a second explosive device. Basically, this is the party of Italian Interior Minister Matteo Salvini, who, of course, is anti-open borders and a Eurosceptic. And he commented, "They try to stop us, but violent delinquents do not scare us. Let's go forward stronger than before." I am alarmed by this normalization of violent behavior as political debate. Over in Austria, their populist interior minister, Herbert Kickl, is floating the idea of charging radical Islamic adherents if they advocate for Sharia law over the constitutional law of Austria. And that's been a big problem all over Europe, where all these refugees are pouring on in and saying, well, we're here now, we demand Sharia law. Forget about the law that all of you people had for yourselves. We demand this. And it's caused a great deal of friction, and partly because of how strict it is. It's antagonistic to women, and basically promotes a fascist worldview. And again, when you are visiting a foreign country or you're emigrating to a foreign country, you integrate. That's just the courteous and respectful thing to do. And I keep going back to that quote by Teddy Roosevelt. Yeah, you're welcome to come here, but we speak one language, English. We have one flag, the American flag. Apparently, Germans were shouting, "Get lost" at Angela Merkel. She was visiting Dresden. They were protesting her open borders policy as well. Meanwhile, in London, Sadiq Khan's utopia is crumbling as Londonistan becomes a third world gang war zone. And there was this horrible, horrible story about this knife attack. There's a lot of knife attacks going on in London right now. And this teenage boy was literally disemboweled on the street. And 3 others were hurt in this rampage. The police have arrested 6 suspects who appear to be African refugees. Now, Ambrose Evans Pritchard is a journalist, old school, a lot of respect for him. He has penned an article saying that Brexit is dead, that the Remainers, the Soros people will never let it happen, that whatever it takes to kill it, it will be killed. All right, we got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be back with the lovely Lady Claire after these few words. And aloha, welcome back to the show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on YouTube, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire. And what she was asking is, as you can see, we have matching uniforms today, at least from the waist up.
Yes.
And this was because the Special Olympics was holding a fundraiser outside our supermarket yesterday, and we tossed in a very small donation for which we got these T-shirts, which would have actually cost us a lot more had we bought them at the shopping mall.
Yes,
So it was a bargain for both.
It was
ends.
a win-win.
It was a win-win situation.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, apparently, and this comes to us from Zero Hedge, stocks and yuan have jumped on reports that the U.S. and China are kind of working their way through the trade talks, which are going to culminate with a meeting between President Trump excuse me, and Chinese President Xi Jinping at multilateral summits in November. Mike, this is a positive thing.
This would be a very positive development. Somebody finally woke up and realized that these sanctions are not working out. They're causing more harm than good.
Yeah, so I'm kind of relieved. There is another story very interesting about Google. There is a movement among Google employees, and it's called Code Yellow, and they are in revolt over a clandestine China project to put a very censored version of Google up in China.
Yeah, well, I can understand they're being upset. There have actually been a lot of very unhappy people at Google, not just over this idea of allowing Google to engage in censorship, allowing the web search engine to engage in censorship, but also over Google's desire to get involved with military contracts, and it's led to some resignations as well.
Yeah. Apparently, the people who have been circulating this email cite urgent moral and ethical issues in a letter that's been circulated internally. And apparently there are a lot of people in Google who are very ticked off about this.
Well, I can understand that because when you work for a company like that, the image of the company is your image as well.
Yeah.
If the company has a good positive image, you feel proud about it. But if the company all of a sudden is engaging in this kind of behavior, I think most employees, they personalize it and they say, this is reflecting badly on me and I really don't like it.
This is not who I am.
And I remember one time many years ago when I was still working in advertising, where the company I was working for was engaged in a very sneaky way to get the name of a cigarette brand on TV. Cigarette advertising was banned. And I had a real problem with that. And I requested to be moved to a different project. We actually have a caller on the line here, Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, guys. How are you doing? Looking forward to the weekend?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, me too. I wanted to call regarding the priest in Canada who got arrested for quoting the Bible in the portions of the Bible that are not fond of homosexuality. And so obviously that is conflicting a lot of like freedom of speech and freedom of religion and all that. And I wanted to mention that he had a fairly clever T-shirt. So he quoted the Bible saying, "Pride goes before the fall." I think the original.
Mateus.
And then he had just a regular rainbow, like not a pride flag rainbow, but just a regular children's rainbow. But it got the point. And it was a homosexual police officer that arrested him. So this is like exercising, the bias of the police officer. It's not illegal to quote the Bible. And he got arrested a few years ago for handing out information pamphlets that were explaining how HIV is, being spread more easily with man-on-man intercourse, And so this is, this is a religion. Like, so we don't have very good freedom of speech here.
No.
And I wanted to also, like, I did get this poster removed from our transit systems that was like the pride flag colors saying that oral pleasure is our business, grocery store, and then it's a grocery store.
Yep.
So, we can make a difference, just that people can,
See,
you can
I
call
think
in.
that's funny. I think that's a funny poster, and I would personally have been okay with that. Listen, Mateus, Canada has not had free speech for a very, very long time. Mm-hmm. They have long ago criminalized criticism of Israel. They've gone over to the dark side, and it is a real problem. And you have this issue that, freedom of speech means freedom to speak your mind, even if people don't like it. And we're on this slippery slope right now where the liberals are saying that free speech has to stop where you offend somebody. Well, the liberals are offended by everything. That's their identity.
That's their MO.
You'll never meet a happy liberal. They're always miserable and offended about something because that's their self-image. And, it's a big planet. No matter what you say, somebody somewhere will be offended by it. But you can't have freedom of speech and an offense-free environment at the same time, and that's just reality. But the liberals have got this fantasy that they're going to have an offensive-free world, but everybody will still have freedom of speech. They'll just have the good sense not to actually use it.
Right.
Yeah, it is true. I wonder how that works with the freedom of speech to put up a public sign, endorsed by the government, advocating oral sex between men, like oral pleasure is our business. Like, it's a gay pride flag. It's talking about, you know what? You can visualize it. It's pretty hardcore. And there's children running around. It's in front of a park.
Yeah, that's
it's kind of hard to say. Like,
I'm sure the parents are going to be very uncomfortable with that, but. It's a conflict. I mean, do you have freedom of religion? Well, then you get to quote the Bible. And as a matter of fact, there was a story, I didn't get to it today, but I'm going to mention it right now, where these Satanists have put up a statue of Baphomet in front of, I think it's either the Arkansas or the Alabama State House. And the point they're trying to make with it is not worship of Satan, but they're saying the State House has the 10 Commandments in it. Which they see as a violation of the First Amendment, where government is not supposed to respect any one institution of religion. So if the 10 Commandments are going to be up there, then this 8-foot-tall bronze statue of Baphomet has to stay there as well. So that one's probably going to wind up in a court case somewhere as well.
Yep.
Anyway, Mateus, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go and get back to the news. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And so let's see. Please continue.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the last time Google employees revolted. And the company literally abandoned its controversial AI drone initiative known as Project Maven. And about a dozen employees quit, and close to 4,000 signed a petition. And many of the same people who led the last effort are now involved in the China protests. So there is a voice of conscience over there. One doesn't see it by the current deplatforming of certain controversial people, but there is a voice of conscience trying to work to steady the course.
In the hierarchy of all of these companies, the ethical, moral people with conscience are down here, and the absolutely immoral, unethical are at the top. That's how they get to be at the top.
Yes, I know.
They're willing to do things that the ethical and moral people are not.
Right. The next thing I'd like to talk about is Turkey, which has been in the news, and allegedly about this reverend who is being held and detained. Well, Mike, that's not really it at all. Mm-hmm. Turkey exercised its right to do what it wanted in terms of defense spending by picking up the Russia S-400 defensive system, which works like crazy, and did not buy the American system. And again, from Zero Hedge, El Arian warns that unless Erdogan changes his course, there's going to be a much wider economic damage. And apparently what Turkey is refusing to do is to raise its interest rates and seek some form of IMF support. And Turkey has said, no, not doing that, not doing that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, any nation that gets tangled up with the IMF, they get bled dry here. By the way, were you aware there's a report that this pastor is actually a CIA station chief?
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. Yeah, that would make absolute sense in terms of U.S. foreign policy. And as typically the case, the first wave of contagion has been technical, driven by outflows from Turkey's currency and bond markets. But the longer this goes on, Mike, it's going to lead to more disruptive financial and economic outcomes. And as such, central banks in several emerging economies, like Argentina, Hong Kong, and Indonesia, have already felt compelled to take countermeasures. And what has followed is what makes this episode of emerging market crisis very different. Because rather than sticking with a course that a number of countries have done, like Argentina earlier this year, Turkey has shunned in a very public manner any help from the IMF. And we've had some very strident pronouncements by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And so what he's got is a terrible depreciating exchange rate.
Yep.
And at one point, the lira was halved, almost half in value. And Turkey has taken a number of measures to attempt to simulate, albeit partially, the traditional approach that emerging economies have tended to follow in the past. It's tightened funding and provided liquidity to domestic...
it's tightened the funding conditions.
Conditions, and at the same time provided liquidity to domestic banks along with regulatory watchdogs, made it harder for foreigners to access lira liquidity, squeezing speculators who had shorted the currency. And it promised to deal with credit and fiscal excesses while ruling out capital controls. Now, they have mobilized at least $15 billion from Qatar. Qatar threw them a lifeline, and to be used for direct investment in Turkey. And in the midst of this, the government also found time to retaliate against the doubling of tariffs on Turkish metal exports by President Trump's administration. And the question, which I guess will sort of be played out in the markets early next week, is if this is going to be enough to take the pressure off the lira, the Turkish currency. What do you think?
Well, we have to take into consideration the possibility of covert economic warfare being waged by the United States. But it could come at a very high cost because of that contagion. A lot of people are concerned about exactly the same thing. The problem with having a global economy is when it comes down, it all comes down together. We saw a foretaste of that back in 2008 with the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud. Now, that should have been a problem only for the U.S. economy. But because of all the links between U.S. banks and European banks, some of those European banks got into trouble. There were reports of secret transfers of gold or gold bonds and clandestine bailouts to keep the system going. But we know that the economy globally is in bad shape. When it breaks, it has to break at one point first, and it could be Turkey.
Yeah, definitely. And even the credit rating agency Fitch is saying that Turkey's actions are probably going to be insufficient to restore policy credibility. This is a big one, you know. And the situation, as you said, may spread in contagion to a lot of other banks and a lot of other countries. And Fitch is calling the response incomplete. And there's another aspect of this, too, because Turkey has taken in a lot of refugees from these war zones. So Turkey's collapse could send millions, with a mill, of refugees flooding into Europe, which is not doing so well with the refugees, they already have here.
And, you know, there had been this deal where Turkey was going to keep these refugees from going to Europe. On certain conditions, which, as I understand it, have not really been met. And, of course, taking care of all these refugees is another reason why Turkey's economy is under strain.
And we've got more sanctions coming from the U.S., the plummeting lira. And already Turkish President Erdogan has said that what the U.S. is doing is nothing short of economic warfare. And you had some information about the background of this alleged U.S. pastor, Andrew Bunson. Pastors are a really good cover and front for operatives, right?
Oh, yeah. When you
Throughout
have,
history?
when you have spies in another country, I mean, there are these diplomatic spies, the ones that everybody sort of nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more are spies. Attached to the embassies. They'll have titles like cultural attaché and things like that. And they follow our spies and we follow their spies, and it's all very civilized. But then you have the deep cover spies that you hope nobody knows about. That's certainly that was the case with the CIA and those 30 agents and assets they lost over in China.
Yikes, that was awful.
And these deep cover agents very often are covered as journalists or religious, clergy.
Or members of NGOs, non-governmental
members of non-governmental organizations here. One of the smarter things the CIA did many, many years ago, as you know, the CIA owns a lot of companies. They're called proprietaries. And one of the ones they owned was this company that published travel guides for all over the world. And they were very good travel guides. I think they may still be in business. I don't know.
Voters Travel Guide?
Voters Travel Guide. And what a wonderful cover that was. You know, their spy would go into the country and everybody would say, oh, Voters Travel Guide, come, let me show you this, let me show you that, let me take you over here. And was rather clever, actually.
I didn't find out until years later, but my late dad actually worked for a CIA proprietary.
Evergreen Air.
No. Slick Airlines.
Slick Airlines.
Slick Airlines.
That was it.
The one good thing.
What a wonderful name. Slick Airlines.
And my late dad was a very excellent aircraft instrument mechanic. If you ever wanted to fly, you wanted to fly on a plane where Spencer had done the testing out of those instruments, because they would have calibrated out at 100%. But the one good thing that they did do was get the Dalai Lama out of Tibet right before the communists came in. So, in my mind, there was a little bit of salvific work on that regard. But getting back to the issue of Turkey, millions of refugees, primarily from North Africa and Syria, would flood into Europe as the Turkish economy collapses. Now, that's an evaluation by Newsweek.
Well, I disagree with Newsweek. Because the war in Syria is coming to a close. They're going to have the battle for Idlib. And then it's time to start rebuilding. Russia and China are already stepping on in. They're going to help with the rebuilding. The U.S. is being cut out of that and all the money that could be made doing that. And we already know that some of the Syrian refugees have already returned from Europe. So I would suspect that once the Syrian war is officially over, that a lot of the Syrians currently living in Turkey are probably going to go back to Syria because they can see what's going on in Europe and what a hostile reaction the refugees have generated with their behavior up there. But there are still the African refugees that are going to have to be dealt with. And meantime, of course, you've got Europe. Countries are starting to slam those gates shut. Even politicians who claim to be pro-immigration are saying there have to be limits. Our economy and our job market cannot absorb this.
No, they just can't.
So I think maybe these African migrants ought to think about going back to Africa, going back to their homes. Because the reality is they weren't really fleeing persecution or war. In fact, the guy who drove that car into that crowd was applying for refugee status, claiming that he feared for his life if he ever went back to Sudan. Then they found out he'd applied for a visa to go back to Sudan on holiday.
Oh, hello.
It's an economic migration. They think Europe and the United States have got all this money just falling from the trees, and they want their share of it.
Well, I don't know about you, but I haven't seen many trees with money on them. The money trees are not there.
Guava, papaya,
avocado,
banana.
But getting back to this issue of Turkey, over 3.5 million refugees are now there. And but there are at least 500,000 refugees from other parts of the Middle East and Northern Africa also living in Turkey, which is very interestingly positioned between... It straddles, if you will, the European world and the Middle East.
It's the gateway to the Middle East here. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and Please continue, Claire.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of finish on this thing with Turkey. Apparently, Erdogan was convinced to bring the European migrant influx under control in exchange for 6.6 billion in assistance. But this may not even be enough if the Turkish economy goes deeper into this spiral down.
Well, as I understand it, Turkey has already spent 60 billion, 6-0, taking care of all of these migrants and refugees.
Yeah. I would also like to go over, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and this cannot be seen as any kind of alt-right reporting. The Wall Street Journal is asking, what was Bruce Orr doing? And, you know, his actions are just untenable, Mike.
Yep.
And it shows us the absolute and complete corruption of the, I guess we could call it the U.S. Injustice Department right now, rather than the Justice Department.
No, it's the Just Us Department.
Yeah, right. This man should immediately have his security clearance yanked.
Yes.
Okay? Because he actually began feeding info to the FBI from dossier author Christopher Steele in late 2016 after the FBI had terminated the guy as a confidential informant for violating the Bureau's rules.
Well, at that point, Steele was being paid for directly through Fusion GPS.
And through Hillary Clinton, I'm sure.
Well, it was a money laundry. Basically, it was from Hillary and the DNC to a law firm, from the law firm to Fusion GPS, and Fusion GPS to Christopher Steele.
Yeah. And apparently, the FBI pumped Mr. Orr for information at least a dozen times, debriefs that remain classified. Why?
They don't want you to know what's in them.
Nah, I guess not. Not. I certainly do. And
I'm mildly curious myself.
Yeah, you know, and apparently the Justice Department has now turned over Orr documents to Congress to show how deeply in bed the guy was with the Clintonistas. Emails, calls, meetings, notes, and describe his interactions and what he collected. And I mean, this conduct is completely troubling to anyone who would like to think that we have a vestige of justice still left in this country.
Nope, it was just completely corrupt. I mean, basically, over Department of Justice, they're acting like a bunch of frat boys. Frat girls. Or frat genderless.
Frat people.
Frat people.
Yes.
And if you've gone to college, you know what I'm talking about. How crazy that gets.
Oh yes, definitely. And apparently, he concealed his role from some superiors because Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein has testified. Now, I don't know if this is under oath, but testified that he had been unaware of Mr. Orr's intermediary status. Do you believe that for a second?
I don't believe anything coming out of Rosenstein's mouth.
Yeah.
We don't really know. All that we know is we don't know.
And it gets better, because Fusion's bank records show Nellie Orr, his wife, benefiting from the Trump opposition research that Mr. Orr continued to pass to the FBI. Now, the Justice Department has declined to comment on this. But even over all of this, the worst is the misconduct by the FBI and the Justice Department.
Yep.
You know, and it was bad enough that the Bureau relied on a dossier crafted by a man in the employ of the rival presidential campaign. Bad enough that it never informed FISC, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, of that dossier's provenance, and bad enough that the FBI didn't fire Steele as a confidential human resource in September of 2016 because it was obvious he was leaking FBI details to the press to harm Trump's electoral chances. And it terminated him only when it was absolutely forced to, when Mr. Steele gave an on-the-record interview last Halloween, Halloween of October 31st, 2016. And now the FBI continued to go to this discredited information in its investigation after the firing by funneling his information via a Justice Department cutout. I mean, the absolute swampery, Mike, just doesn't end here.
Good term, swampery.
Swampery.
I'm going to start using that one here.
The swampery is complete. And, Mr. President, I'm hoping your vow to drain it is going to start getting real. I want to see Hillary Clinton's security clearance revoked.
Yeah, absolutely.
That will be when I know he's
Donald
serious.
Trump is not draining the swamp. In fact, he opened up the White House doors and he hired the alligators and water moccasins.
Yeah. It's really sad to think of how low this government has sunk in terms of the, how can I say this? The
rot.
machinations. Yeah, the rot.
Yeah.
And just, we're not getting the government we thought we were, and we haven't been for a long time.
No, we haven't been for a long time. And I keep saying, I foresee a Soviet Union-style collapse as the future of the United States federal government. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, what's your next story?
Well, the timing strikes me as very odd on this. The U.S. is doubling the number of Marines in Norway. And the U.S. has confirmed to more than double, actually, the number of troops in Norway. And Russia has criticized it as clearly unfriendly. Now, the Norwegian Defense Ministry on Wednesday said that the U.S. had informed them that they planned to push forward a grouping to increase the number of U.S. Marines stationed in Norway from 300 to up to 700. That's kind of a huge, jump.
Yes,
right?
it is.
And so the schedule apparently will continue beyond 2018 and could include up to 700 soldiers. Now, these Marines will be the first foreign troops stationed in Norway since World War II. Now, they were expected to leave Norway at the end of 2018, but the posting will now last up to 5 years. Michael, what's up with that? Talk to me.
It's just more of this, building up the Cold War. The Russians are bad. Putin is evil. We've got, we wish we could spend the tax money on the roads and the schools and the hospitals and the bridges and the rail line, but gosh darn those Russians, we have to spend all of your money on bombs and bullets and aircraft carriers that don't really work all that well, airplanes that asphyxiate their pilots, and littoral combat ships that will never actually see a day of combat.
Right. Now, in the local Norwegian news, Norway's foreign minister, Ine Eriksen Spøgje, dismissed Russia's claims and said that the Norwegian government position is that this is not a permanent military base. Oh, yeah, right, dear.
Yeah.
And it's also been met with criticism in Norway from both the social left and labor parties, who are arguing that the priority should be maintaining a strong Norwegian troop presence near the northern border with Russia. However, a gentleman by the name of Arkady Savitsky writes for the Strategic Culture Foundation that the formation of Norway into the tip of the knife for an attack on Russia is taking place because of the speedy militarization of other Scandinavian countries, the Baltic states and Poland.
Yeah,
so
that's basically what it is.
Yeah, it's not a question of when this is going to happen. It's going to happen soon. It's going to happen soon.
Well, I don't think anybody in this country really wants to go to war against Russia.
I'd like to hope not.
This is a replay of the Cold War, where the government went booga booga at the American people. The Soviets are coming to get you. I thought the Soviets were our friends. They helped us out against Hitler. Well, now they're the enemy, and you've got to hate them, and you've got to be afraid of them. And that's why we can't spend your tax money on the roads, schools, hospitals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
It's the military-industrial complex, as Eisenhower warned us about. And now they're trying to scream booga booga about Russia again. And from the point of view of the military-industrial complex, the idea is to have our troops all over the world requiring all kinds of supplies and all kinds of equipment, all of which cost huge amounts of money with huge markups. And these defense contractors are getting insanely wealthy off of this. And they support members of Congress who support them. They make a lot of campaign donations. They parcel out subcontracts for these weapon systems into the districts of members of Congress who support the new Cold War.
Right.
And any member of Congress who basically says this is not really a good idea can count on not getting the contracts into their district, and that, of course, has repercussions on their next election.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, with the military-industrial complex in this country, we are not getting the weapons we need to have any kind of a military edge over Russia and China.
If it's a Cold War, they just have to look good and look mean.
Yeah.
By the way, Fox News is now running a story on the military threat from China. China's the new threat.
Oh, boy.
You know, they really didn't get much traction with be afraid of the Russians. So now it's be afraid of the Chinese.
Yeah.
And that won't get any traction, and then it'll be afraid of the Australians. Be afraid of the Kiwis. Be afraid of somebody. We want your money here.
Yeah, the 15 minutes of hate.
Yeah, the 2-minute hate.
2-minute hate.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe 15 was a little too tiring.
No, it's 15 minutes of fame and 2 minutes of hate.
Ah, okay. There we go.
All right.
There has been a very interesting development with Russia. They are now deploying nuclear-capable strategic bombers near Alaska. And so as NATO continues to defensively posture with an increasing number of troops, infrastructure, missile launchers, and missile shield systems, apparently the Russians are doing likewise on the other side of the world. And the Russian military say that 2 nuclear-capable strategic bombers have flown to the easternmost Chukotka Peninsula near Alaska as part of an exercise.
It's not that near to Alaska, by the way.
No.
He's trying to make it, look like you can see these bombers from Sarah Palin's
Yeah,
front
but
porch.
I mean, it's over 4,000 miles away from Alaska.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Not exactly near. But I don't think that the Russians are taking these moves lightly, like the increase of the Marines in Norway. They're making their own moves as well.
These are all provocations.
Yeah.
And, of course, Putin has to deal with his own hardliners back in Russia. And they've got to match force on force. Russia's advantage is they can do it for a lot less money than the military-industrial complex. In fact, this year's Russian budget actually cut spending for the military. They don't need to spend as much as we do because their military industry is all about making the weapons, not about making record profits for the stockholders and the executives.
Yeah. And consequently, they do have weaponry, as has been seen in Syria with the Russians.
Yes.
That performs exactly as advertised. The U.S. military industrial.
And that's why countries like Turkey are dropping the American-made weapons.
Yeah.
And they're going with the Russian-made weapons. More bang for the buck, so to speak.
Absolutely. Speaking of bang, I'd like to turn over to a problem in California.
Like they don't have enough.
Yeah. Apparently, the defunct nuclear power plant on California coast is being characterized as a Fukushima waiting to happen. Now, this is the power plant that was shut down in 2012 and is still leaking radioactive material. It's the old San Onofre plant located in San Clemente. And there was a leak there that occurred due to malpractice. At least that's what we were told.
That actually is what happened.
Right.
The owners of San Onofre wanted to make more money by generating more electricity, so they replaced the heat exchangers that basically take the contaminated water from the reactors and use it to heat uncontaminated water, which then goes to the turbines.
Right.
And they made them a lot larger. They told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, that this was routine maintenance, but it was actually a clandestine upgrade.
Yeah.
And then some budgetary person basically changed the specifications for the heat exchanger tubes to a metal less able to withstand the radiation that was coming from the primary cooling loop water.
That's scary.
And that's why it sprang the leak, and it's still leaking to this day.
Yeah.
Now, it's not going to be a new Fukushima for the simple reason that the reactor has been shut down. And so it's not generating heat. The spent fuel rods are, obviously still warm. But it's not an active reactor.
No.
It could be a nuclear disaster. It's certainly not going to be on the scale of Fukushima or even Chernobyl. Might be an equal to 3 Mile Island.
Okay. But it's still storing about 3.6 million pounds of lethal radioactive waste, right?
Yes. According to this report, yes.
Yeah. And there was apparently a worker who blew the whistle on the plant just last week because they had a near catastrophe. As the local outlet, the Dana Pointer, reported, plant worker David Fritsch explained what happened in a public meeting. And he said that on 3 August this year, a 100-ton canister filled with highly radioactive nuclear waste was being downloaded into a temporary transport carrier to be moved a few hundred yards from inside the plant to a storage silo buried near the San Onofre beach. And as the thin-walled canister was being lowered, it snagged on a guide ledge 4 feet from the top. Now, this is scary stuff. Crane operators were unaware that the canister had stopped descending, and the rigging went completely slack, leaving the full weight of the heavy canister perched on that ledge by about 1/4 of an inch. And apparently, had the ledge not held for the hour more it took for workers to realize and work with the error, that thin-walled canister of toxic nuclear waste would have fallen 18 feet to the ground. That's scary stuff.
That would have been a problem.
That's scary stuff.
What I'm wondering is why, with a cargo like that, they didn't have somebody on the ground on a radio watching it, talking to the crane operators. Well,
that would have been logical.
Well, it would have been expensive. You know, we've got to save money here, so we're not going to have that. I remember one time I was working on a commercial which involved a 747 that had to be done in computer animation. And as part of the research for the commercial, we got to go out to the airport and walk around a 747, not inside the cabin or through the gate, but actually in the maintenance area where the plane was undergoing a complete renovation. And we were there when they started to tow it out of the hangar. And they had 6 guys around that aircraft with whistles. And at one point, somebody had to blow the whistle because the vertical stabilizer had snagged on a cable that hadn't been pulled up high enough. That's how you handle delicate cargo like that. This borders on criminal negligence on the part of the San Onofre manager.
I agree. And thank heaven there was someone willing to talk about it publicly.
Yes.
You know, I'm going back to Europe and Asia, and to Zero Hedge, and a gentleman, I believe he's been on your show, Pepe Escobar? Long time ago.
Long time ago, yes.
Very bright man for whom I have a lot of respect. And he's talking about something that is nothing less than completely historic and a big deal. And this is all hands on deck as the Caspian sails toward Eurasia integration. Now, the 5 states surrounding the sea, Russia, Azerbaijan, Iran, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, have finally reached a series of compromises and understandings on sovereign and exclusive rights as well as freedom of navigation of the Caspian Sea.
And this has been an area of friction for a very, very long time. And so this is a good thing.
And it's, you know, the deal's been in the works for a long time on the legal status, and it was signed on Sunday in the Kazakh port of Aktu. And it is being said to be a defining moment in the ongoing massive drive toward Eurasian integration. Think of this as maybe a next step toward the Silk Road, the Silken Belt Road.
This, I think, is going to be a parallel.
Yes.
Because the One Belt, One Road initiative is traveling far north of it.
Yes.
But again, it's considered a connectivity corridor between Asia and Europe, and there is a wealth of oil and gas in the area. And now they, rather than go to war over it, they've all agreed to say share and share alike.
And apparently, a lot of the reasons for the complexity of the negotiations had to do with how was the Caspian being defined? Was it a sea or was it a lake? And should it be divided between the 5 states into separate sovereign tracts, or developed kind of like you do a condominium? And so apparently they reached some difficult compromises on these rights: freedom of navigation, freedom of access of all the vessels in the Caspian Sea to the world's oceans and back. In the words of a Kazakh diplomat, it's a pipeline.
Yes.
This is one of the most important situations you're not going to hear on the prostitutes and correspondence. And crucially, on a military level, there are only 5 countries now which will be allowed to navigate. The United States is not one of those countries.
Military forces.
Military forces, yeah. And President Putin described the deal in no uncertain terms as having been epic-making in its significance, and you can understand why. So what is going to happen the next time the U.S. challenges it with a freedom of navigation thing?
Well, I'm expecting that will happen.
Yeah.
Because of the habitual chest thumping we're seeing coming out of Washington, D.C.
Yes.
I imagine that they'll be asked nicely to leave and be escorted out by the military forces in the area. The captain of a U.S. ship would have to be a bonehead to actually fire a shot, but who knows? The problem with being in this Cold War situation is it takes only one accident to turn it hot. And we learned that one the hard way during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right, right. Well, going back to Latin America, Secda Matus is unhappy. And he claims Latin American countries are selling out their sovereignty to Russia and China.
And by golly, they should sell it out to us.
Yeah, I mean, come on. Apparently, there's a Chinese space force in Argentina, Russian control of Venezuelan gas, and South American armies equipped with the latest Chinese and Russian hardware. And until recently, it would have sounded like a plot on of a thriller, but Secda Matus is claiming that economic and military posturing by Beijing and Moscow have been on the rise for the last decade. Well,
no, that's not what's going on.
That's not what's happening.
The United States is in decline.
Yeah.
That's what's going on.
Yeah. And analysts are saying that Chinese loans in recent years have allowed authoritarian leaders to consolidate power in Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and have separately generated corruption scandals that have brought down the presidents of Ecuador and Argentina.
Oh, yes. Let's blame China for that. It's all the fault of China.
Or Russia. Let's blame both of them.
That's right.
And they've been selling military equipment. Well, I'm sorry, but right now, Secda Matus, you can get a lot more bang for your buck in buying from Moscow and China because their weaponry is working as advertised.
And it doesn't cost anywhere near as much.
Yeah.
And, I mean, the U.S. is literally trying to arm twist all these other countries to go back to the world as it was in the 1950s.
Ain't going to work.
Depend on the U.S. dollar for all trade and banking, buy all your weapons from the United States, buy America's products even if you don't like them. And no, it isn't working. The U.S. is becoming isolated. The global economy is restructuring itself, and right in the middle of it is going to be this deep, dark hole where the U.S. dollar used to be.
Yeah, everything I'm seeing...
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials.
Alrighty.
And we'll be right back.
Okay.
Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we have an update on this story about CNN trying to get the names and home addresses of the jurors in the Manafort trial. Claire?
Apparently, Judge Ellis has declined this motion by WAPO, CNN, and BuzzFeed to unseal jurors' names, nor will he release sealed transcripts from bench conferences. He says that he will order them released after the trial has concluded.
Meaning the transcripts here.
Yeah.
Now, Judge Ellis is now under federal protection because of the threats that he was receiving.
Yeah.
And by the way, here's the full list of everybody who demanded that sealed juror information. The Washington Compost, the New York Slimes, Associated Press, CNN, NBC, Politico, and BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
Now, I'm smelling panic and desperation, and especially given the fact that the jury was asking for a clarification of reasonable doubt.
Right.
This trial may not be going good for Mueller. And as I mentioned before in the program, Mueller has bet the farm on getting a conviction here to save his reputation, to basically make it look like he didn't just completely waste the last year and a half and several $1 million of taxpayer money. But if Manafort is acquitted, and remember, he was investigated on these exact same charges 8 years ago.
By Rosenstein, right?
By Rosenstein.
Yeah, yeah.
And they decided it wasn't worth prosecuting. So if Manafort is acquitted, okay, then It's a huge blow to the deep state. It's a huge blow to the corporate media who've been treating him like he's guilty all along.
Yeah.
And it's a huge blow to Robert Mueller. And if they're resorting to this idea of trying to get the jurors' names and addresses, and they're threatening the judge.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that tells you just how ugly this whole business is getting.
Yeah.
Okay, what's your next story here?
Next story is something that Blackwater founder Eric Prince is floating regarding Afghanistan. This has been around for a while.
Yeah.
But apparently President Trump is so frustrated with whatever changes in personnel, which of course will not work in Afghanistan, and the fact that it's been producing no results. And Eric Prince is talking about privatizing the war.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, this would be one of the worst things this government could possibly do.
Well, that's true for two reasons. One, it will drive the cost of the war up.
Yeah.
And two, privatized armies are not subject to the Geneva rules.
No.
And we already know that Blackwater was contracted to work in Iraq, and some of the worst atrocities committed down there were done by the Blackwater soldiers.
Yeah.
So it's generally a bad idea. But you need to understand that there is a segment of the Pentagon that doesn't want to make progress in Afghanistan because if they win in Afghanistan, then they have to pack up all their toys and go home and stop getting all that money.
Yeah.
You know, these wars get dragged out in part to keep the flow of cash going.
And the flow of opium right now when we're talking about
and that
Afghanistan.
oil pipeline right away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there's the music. It's time for us to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Have yourselves a really restful weekend. We certainly are going to try and do that ourselves here. Stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got a lot of stuff to share with you as well. Please make a point of talking to everybody about how the corporate social media is trying to silence the independent media, and ask, what are they so afraid of? We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.